May 1940. A conference room in the War Office, London. A junior officer demonstrates his prototype to a room full of generals. He pulls a glass sphere from a wooden handle, peels away a canvas cover, and presses the sticky surface against a steel plate. The senior officers exchange glances. One laughs openly, another calls it a children's toy. The third suggests the designer return to his engineering textbooks. 3 years later, that same ridiculous weapon would account for more destroyed German armor than any other British handheld anti-tank device of the entire war. It looked like a glass ball on a stick. It was covered in fabric soaked with birdlime. It had to be manually stuck onto a moving tank. It was, by any conventional military standard, the most absurd anti-tank weapon ever proposed. It was also the weapon that British and Allied infantry would use to destroy more Panzers, half-tracks, and armored vehicles than the Piat, the Boy's rifle, and conventional anti-tank grenades combined. The No. 74 grenade, known universally as the sticky bomb, was never meant to impress generals in conference rooms. It was meant to give desperate infantrymen a fighting chance against German armor, and it did so with a combination of raw explosive power and adhesive chemistry that Wehrmacht tank crews learned to fear. The problem facing British ordnance designers in 1940 was simple to state and nearly impossible to solve. The German Blitzkrieg had demonstrated that tanks were no longer just infantry support vehicles but instruments of operational breakthrough. British infantry needed a way to stop these armored monsters, but the weapons available were deeply inadequate. The Boy's anti-tank rifle weighed 36 pounds, required a two-man crew, and by 1940 could barely penetrate the frontal armor of newer German tanks. The No. 68 anti-tank grenade was essentially a standard Mills bomb with a concentrated charge, effective only if thrown with perfect accuracy at tracks or vision ports. The Molotov cocktail worked, but required getting close enough to a tank to smell the diesel fumes, and even then success was far from guaranteed. What British infantry needed was something that could be carried by a single soldier, deployed at close range, penetrate armor reliably, and be produced in quantities sufficient to equip entire divisions. The specification seemed impossible. Most military engineers thought it was impossible. The task fell to a small team at Military Intelligence Research, a division operating under deliberately vague bureaucratic cover. The lead designer was Major Millis Jeffress, an engineer who had earned a reputation for unconventional solutions to tactical problems. Jeffress approached the anti-tank problem not as a question of penetration velocity or standoff distance, but as a question of adhesive contact and concentrated blast effect. If you could not throw a grenade hard enough or accurately enough to guarantee a hit on a weak point, then you needed to physically stick the explosive to the tank and ensure it detonated in contact with the armor. The challenge was threefold. First, the adhesive. Conventional glues and tacks were useless against armored steel, particularly steel that might be covered in mud, oil, or dust. Jeffress experimented with various compounds before settling on a mixture based on birdlime, a traditional sticky substance made from holly bark that had been used for centuries to trap birds. When spread on stockinette fabric, this adhesive remained tacky under a wide range of conditions and could achieve sufficient contact with metal surfaces to hold nearly 4 pounds of explosive in place. The adhesive layer was protected by 2 hemispherical metal covers that were removed just before use, exposing the sticky surface. Second, the explosive charge. The grenade needed enough power to penetrate armor, but had to remain light enough for infantry to carry multiple units. Jeffress settled on 1¼ pounds of Nobel 808 plastic explosive, a nitrocellulose-based compound that was more stable and more powerful than TNT. This charge was molded into a glass sphere approximately 4 inches in diameter. Glass was chosen specifically because it would shatter completely on detonation, ensuring that all the explosive force was directed against the armor rather than being contained by a metal casing. Third, the fusing mechanism. The grenade had to be safe to carry, simple to activate, and reliable enough to function even if the soldier was under fire when deploying it. The solution was a 5-second delay fuse, activated by removing a safety pin and releasing a lever on the wooden handle. Once activated, the soldier had 5 seconds to attach the grenade to the tank and withdraw to a safe distance. The handle itself was designed to break away upon impact, leaving only the explosive sphere adhered to the target. This breakaway feature was critical because it meant the soldier did not have to press the grenade against the tank with sustained force, merely slap it on and move. The effect was extraordinary. When detonated in direct contact with armor plate, the 1 1/4 pound charge of Nobel 808 could penetrate approximately 2 inches of homogeneous steel armor. This was sufficient to defeat the side and rear armor of every German tank in service in 1940, including the Panzer III and Panzer IV. Against half-tracks, armored cars, and self-propelled guns, the sticky bomb was devastatingly effective. Against the thinner armor of engine compartments and fuel tanks, it was nearly always fatal to the vehicle. The weapon itself measured approximately 7 inches in length when assembled, with the glass sphere accounting for roughly 4 inches of that length. The wooden handle protruded from the base of the sphere, looking for all the world like a child's toy or a primitive ceremonial object. The stockinette fabric covering the adhesive surface was typically olive drab or khaki, though late war production sometimes used whatever fabric was available. There was no aiming mechanism, no sighting system, just a pin, a lever, and instructions to remove the metal covers, activate the fuse, and press the sticky surface against the target. The effective range was 0. You had to touch the tank. At these distances, conventional concepts of accuracy were academic. What mattered was courage, timing, and adhesive chemistry. Production began in mid-1940, initially at a small facility in Hertfordshire. The exact numbers remain somewhat uncertain even today, but estimates suggest approximately 2.5 million No. 74 grenades were manufactured between 1940 and 1943. The variance in estimates reflects inconsistent record-keeping during the most desperate phase of the war, when production priorities shifted weekly and conventional documentation was often secondary to simply getting weapons into the field. Early production used carefully selected hollybark adhesive, but later batches substituted synthetic compounds when natural supplies became constrained. The glass spheres were initially blown individually, but by 1942, mass production techniques allowed for rapid manufacturing using standardized molds. The first operational use came in the Western Desert in late 1940 and early 1941. British infantry and Commonwealth forces began receiving sticky bombs through standard ordnance channels, often with minimal training beyond basic safety protocols. The weapon earned immediate respect among infantrymen who had faced German armor with nothing but rifles and prayers. In North Africa, Australian and New Zealand troops used sticky bombs extensively against Italian M1340 tanks and German Panzer IIs and the IIIs. The side armor of these vehicles, typically between 15 and 30 millimeters thick, was well within the penetration capability of the grenade. One documented account from Tobruk describes an Australian infantryman destroying 3 Italian tanks in a single engagement by approaching under cover of darkness, attaching sticky bombs to the engine compartments, and withdrawing before the 5-second fuses detonated. All 3 tanks burned. In France after D-Day, British and Canadian infantry employed sticky bombs against German armor operating in the Bocage, the dense hedgerow country of Normandy. The close terrain and limited sight lines meant that German tanks often passed within meters of concealed infantry positions. British soldiers would wait for a panzer to move past their position, emerge from cover, run alongside the vehicle, slap a sticky bomb onto the side or rear hull, and dive for cover before detonation. The psychological impact on German tank crews was substantial. Tank warfare doctrine assumed that infantry anti-tank weapons required standoff distance and clear lines of sight. The sticky bomb violated both assumptions. A tank could be destroyed by an infantryman the crew never saw, emerging from hedgerows or ruined buildings at point-blank range. In the Far East, British and Indian troops used sticky bombs against Japanese tanks and bunkers. Japanese armor, typically thinly protected compared to German vehicles, was particularly vulnerable. The Type 95 Heigo light tank, with maximum armor of just 12 millimeters, could be penetrated by a sticky bomb almost anywhere on its hull. More importantly, the weapon proved effective against fortified positions. The adhesive surface allowed infantry to attach grenades to pillbox firing slits, bunker ventilation shafts, or armored doors, ensuring the explosive detonated exactly where it would cause maximum damage. If you are finding this deep dive into forgotten weapons interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. Now let us examine how the sticky bomb compared to what the Germans and Americans were developing. German anti-tank grenades during this period were primarily the Panzerwerf mine and various iterations of magnetic mines. The Hafthaladung 3 magnetic anti-tank grenade could deliver a shaped charge that penetrated up to 140 millimeters of armor, substantially more than the sticky bomb. However, the magnetic attachment system only worked against ferrous steel and was useless against tanks with Zimmerit anti-magnetic paste applied to their hulls. The paste, a rough concrete-like coating, became standard on German armor by 1943, specifically to defeat magnetic mines. The sticky bomb's adhesive system worked regardless of whether the target had been treated with Zimmerit, mud, or any other coating. It simply stuck. The Americans produced the M9A1 anti-tank grenade, essentially a rifle-launched shaped charge. This weapon was effective, achieving penetration of approximately 75 millimeters of armor at optimal angles. However, the M9A1 required a rifle grenade launcher, specialized ammunition, and training in indirect fire techniques. The grenade itself weighed just over 1 pound, but the complete system, including launcher and propellant cartridges, was significantly heavier than carrying multiple sticky bombs. A comparison of specifications tells the story clearly. The sticky bomb achieved approximately 50 millimeters of penetration, with 570 grams of explosive in a package that weighed 1.25 kilograms and could be carried without specialized equipment. The Hafthaladung achieved superior penetration, but was defeated by surface treatments and required magnetic attachment. The M9A1 offered standoff capability, but required a rifle, launcher, and specialized training. In the critical metric of giving ordinary infantry a reliable, simple method to destroy armor at close range, the sticky bomb was in a category of its own. There was one significant limitation. The adhesive, while effective, required removing protective covers immediately before use. This meant the weapon had to be prepared in the final moments before contact, often while under fire. Soldiers reported that fumbling with the metal hemispheres while a tank approached was psychologically demanding, to understate the matter considerably. Additionally, the glass sphere could break prematurely if dropped or mishandled, exposing the soldier to sticky adhesive and unstable explosive. Field reports document several instances of grenades detonating prematurely due to rough handling or defective fuses, though exact casualty figures remain classified or lost to time. The psychological legacy was more enduring than the physical evidence. German tank crews who served on the Western Front or in North Africa learned to fear close infantry contact in ways that earlier generations of tankers had not. The knowledge that any infantryman with sufficient courage could destroy a 50-ton tank with a weapon that cost less than 10 pounds to manufacture created a permanent paranoia. Veterans of the Africa Corps reported hearing rumors of British soldiers carrying bombs that stuck to armor like honey, bombs that could not be brushed off or dislodged, bombs that detonated with enough force to send flame through the crew compartment. London. British generals rejected a weapon that looked like a toy. They called it primitive. They said it would never work. They were certain that no soldier would be brave enough to approach an enemy tank closely enough to physically touch it. British infantry proved them wrong on every front where German armor operated. The number 74 grenade represents a particular kind of wartime innovation, the kind born not from elegance or sophistication, but from desperate necessity. A weapon measured not in penetration depth or standoff range, but in raw courage. in split-second timing, in the willingness to run toward death rather than away from it. British engineers solved a problem that others said could not be solved. They turned adhesive chemistry into armor penetration. And they did it with a glass ball, a wooden stick, and a pound of explosive that generals had laughed at. That was British desperation engineering. That was what infantrymen carried into the bocage. And that was how a primitive bomb stopped more Panzers than any other.